right, so today my drink for the afternoon is a protein powder shake or frappuccino, whatever you want to label it. Just something I concocted out of some protein powder that I had bought for Justin, my husband, a while back. And it was a cafe latte flavor and he just really wasn't a fan. And so I've been trying to finish it up just so we don't waste it. I mixed it up with some coffee that I had reheated and forgotten to drink from this morning with some ice and some milk and some chocolate sauce, and it turned out great. This is exactly what I like to do in the afternoon, mix a little bit of caffeine with a little bit of protein. It kind of gives me that boost to get to dinner time. So that's what I'm drinking today, but let's jump into the video. All right, so you guys know that I typically love to label myself a curriculum junkie, and that is true in all subjects of our homeschool except for literature. I very rarely use any type of formal curriculum for literature, and I probably never will again. And so today I want to share with you all what I use to cover literature in our homeschool without a formal curriculum. This is something that I have kind of morphed together through the years. We call it lit logs or literature logs. And so I just want to dive deep, explain what it is, how we use it, and what all the details are. But before I go into all of that, I do want to share with you where the idea for lit logs came from. So buckle up, here's just a little story time with Sarah. I attended public school in the late 80s, in the early 90s, the golden age in my opinion. But anyways, when I was in kindergarten or first grade, I was placed in this kind of experimental group where they ditched teaching us phonics and they started teaching us a new way to read. I honestly, even now, don't really understand what their motivation or their methodology was. It was a mix of sight words and whole words, but I never learned any type of letter sounds or letter blends. And let's just be honest, it crashed and burned. They ditched the program very, very quickly, realizing it was not working. But sadly, that meant that I never really learned to read well. I vividly remember always being in the struggling reading group, in being separated in class. I remember dreading the teacher calling on me to read aloud. And I remember even in middle school, when I would hear kids talk about sounding out a word, I had no idea what they were talking about. I really didn't even understand what that meant. And so to say that my reading journey started out awful is putting it lightly. But all of this changed when I got to junior high school. I was put into a reading and literature class with an amazing, amazing teacher who opened up my eyes to reading, to the world of good novels and books, and helped me to gain confidence and a love for reading. Now, how did this magical woman do this? She had a really, really interesting process, and this is honestly where the idea of lit logs kind of came from. When we entered her classroom at the beginning of the semester, she did not have a syllabus. She did not have a set list of books that we had to read and do tests for. Instead, we walked in and she had tables lined with books. And for the entire class period, she went around and did kind of a book fair where she would read the back cover of the book, give us the setting and a few key details about what the novel was about. And then she moved on to the next one. And by the end of the class, she had maybe gone through 15 or 20 novels. And then she said, you guys choose. Any of these books on this table, you get to choose to read from this school year and to do projects on. Now, if there wasn't a book that was to our liking on this table, we also had the option to bring our own book to her of our choice. And as long as she approved of it, we could read that. And so suddenly I wasn't being forced to read this book that was on a to-do list. I got to have power to choose and to be interested in what I was reading. And this, first and foremost, was game-changing. The second thing that she did that just changed my perspective about reading was I didn't have to do reports and tests. Instead, she had us get into groups and do book discussions. We got paired off with anybody else in the class that was reading the same book we were. And during class time, we sat and discussed what we were reading. Sometimes she would assign us a really fun project where we would have to maybe illustrate a scene from the book, or act out a scene from the book, or get up in front of the class and talk about our favorite character from the book. But it just went at reading, at literature in a completely different direction than I had ever been exposed to throughout my entire public schooling career. And this, sadly, was the one lone year throughout my entire education that I loved reading. I was so excited to go to class. I was so excited to read the books when I got home. But then I went to high school, and it went right back to what you would expect in a traditional classroom of reading a book, memorizing some passages, taking a test, maybe getting some cliff notes, and just really trying to pass the test. And I decided when I became a homeschooler that I wanted the experience that I had in junior high and 8th grade. I wanted that for my kids, not just for 1 year, but for all the time. And so that is where the idea of lit logs originally came from. Now, I also definitely have to give some major credit to the idea of lit logs to Charlotte Mason and also Sarah Mackenzie from the Read Aloud Revival. My junior high school teacher, Charlotte Mason, and Sarah Mackenzie get all the credit for helping me discover lit logs. All right, so let's get into the details. What exactly is a lit log? Well, basically it is a reading journal, a journal where every entry has two things, an illustration and a written narration. So let's just break that down a little bit. First of all, we all know what an illustration is. A drawing, a painting, even a doodle of something that is going on in a book. So when my kids have created literature logs before, I have had them copy the cover of the book, or copy one of their favorite illustrations from a page in a picture book. Or maybe they'll be really creative and draw a scene that they have envisioned in their head that they have read in a chapter book. It can really be anything that they want. The one thing I do encourage them is that I want them to spend a good chunk of time on it. I want it to be kind of like an art project. And then to go along with the illustration, I ask for a written narration. Now, if you're not familiar with what narration means, it's basically just a brief summary or an overview of what they read. I'm pretty loose in my definition of this. They're allowed to tell me who their favorite character is and why, or what happened in the book and why they enjoyed it, or something that they've learned from what they read that day. Or they can just give me a simple retelling of what happened in the story or in the chapter. I really give them a lot of freedom in this area, but I do want a nice, pretty chunky written narration or written response about what they are reading. So let's talk about supplies. What do you need in order to create a lit log? Well, first of all, you need literature or a book that you are reading from, reading aloud to your child, or that they are reading on their own. So for older kids, this could be Johnny Tremain. For middle school kids, this could be A Long Walk to Water. For younger elementary school kids, this could be Go Dog Go, or any other picture book or chapter book that you are reading aloud to your kids or that they read on their own for fun. To go along with this, the other supplies you need, super simple. You need some type of journal, a writing and or art journal. So when my kids were younger, we used to use composition notebooks. I found the ones that had room on the top of the page for a drawing and then had several lines underneath for writing. That's what we used when they were in elementary school. As they've gotten older, we switched to these 10 by 10 drawing books. These just have really nice drawing paper in them. I get them on Rainbow Resource, and then they just use regular notebook paper, 3-ring, lined paper that they will paste in here next to their illustrations. That's what they do their written responses on. To go along with this, obviously they're also going to need something to write with and something to illustrate with. So whether that is paints or colored pencils, crayons, markers, whatever your child and you decide that you want them to use. As you can tell, what you need for lit logs is very minimal and very inexpensive. One of the big perks of using no curriculum. Okay, so how does a lit log work? Well, the beauty of it, there is a ton of flexibility, but let me just break it down into some really simple steps. First of all, you need to choose a book. Either you need to choose a book that you are going to assign to your child Maybe you're going to be like my junior high school teacher and give them a plethora of books that they get to choose from and choose the book that they want to read. Maybe you have a built-in reading list that you are checking off as you go. But that's really up to you and up to your homeschool. But first step, choose a book. So let's just use A Long Walk to Water as our example. Now, the next thing, once you have chosen the book, is you need to decide who is going to read it. Is your child going to read this on their own? Is your child going to read it aloud to you? Are you going to read it aloud to them? Just decide who is going to be doing the reading. Then you need to decide on a time frame. Are you going to assign a certain amount of pages per day? Are you going to do a certain amount of time of reading every single day? So maybe 20 minutes every afternoon. Maybe you want them to read one chapter every day for however many weeks it takes them to get through the book. And then assign a time frame for their reading journals. Are you going to have them complete an entry every single day? Are you going to have them complete an entry once a week? Are you going to have them do one massive entry that covers the entire book as a whole? Again, super flexible. Do what works for you, for your child, for the age, for the book. You can change this up every single book, every single year, whatever works for your family. Now, the beauty of lit logs is that they work with any age child, no matter what their reading or writing level or skill level is. So let's just break this down. Let's pretend that I have a kindergartner or first or second grader, a child who is still really developing the mechanics of writing and learning how to read. For them, a lit log could look like this. Let's say that they read one of the readers from the Frog and Toad collection. Now, this is a storybook treasury. It's a lot of books put together in one. But let's just pretend they just read one of the Frog and Toad readers. I would then have them do their illustration, which could be them copying the cover of the book or drawing their favorite page from the book. When Noah was little, he used to take tracing paper and trace his favorite scene in the book, and that was his illustration, and that was great. But they would do their art project, and then for their narration side of their lit log, because they're so young, I would maybe let them do an oral narration, where they wouldn't have to actually write anything down, but instead would tell the story back to me in their own words. I could also have them do an oral narration that's dictated to me and I write it out for them. When my kids were younger, sometimes I would take their dictations and I would write it up on a whiteboard, and then they would use that as copywork and write their story copywork style next to their illustration. Now, moving on into third or fourth grade, kids who are starting to read some early chapter books independently. Let's say, for instance, my daughter's reading The Adventures of Laura and Jack. I would assign for her to do a lit log, and I would again expect for her to do an illustration at a third or fourth grade art level. And then the narration to go along with this, I would expect it to be 3, 4, maybe 5 sentences long. A good rule of thumb that has worked in our house through the years is whatever grade level you are in is the minimum amount of sentences I expect for your narration. So if you're in third grade, I expect it to be around 3 sentences. If you're in fifth grade, I expect it to be about 5 sentences long as a minimum. It's just a really nice guide. All right, and then moving on into early middle school, 5th, 6th grade. This is when they're really starting to read some, good sized chapter books. Let's say they're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They would do their illustration, and then I would expect probably a 1 or 2 paragraph written narration, a good page long written narration to go along with their reading. Now, for 7th or 8th grade, late middle school, early junior high, I actually just pulled this book off my daughter's bookshelf. She is finishing up Ella Enchanted. At this age, I'm expecting her to do 2 or 3 paragraphs of a written narration along with her illustration. And by the time they're in junior high school, these illustrations, they're really looking like beautiful art projects. They're just gorgeous. Now, we aren't quite there yet, but my son is starting high school next year. And so we are planning on doing lit logs all the way through high school. And so the way we implement this may be a little bit different. Now, let's say he is reading Johnny Tremain for U.S. history. This is on my son's reading list for this school year. Maybe I would have him simply just write a paragraph a day about what he is reading. Maybe I will have him do a 5-paragraph paper for the week about what he read. Maybe he would decide to do one big long paper or narration about the book as a whole. There's a lot of things you could do with this for high school, but I'm really excited to see how this grows and how we utilize lit logs in high school. Now, all of the examples I just gave you for the most part were kids reading books on their own. You could use this as a family subject, as your read aloud time. Maybe you read aloud to your kids every day at lunch, and then in the afternoons they break off and they work on lit logs and they draw a picture of what you read to them aloud and write out a little something for you about what you read at lunch. You can implement this in so many different ways, and that's really the beauty of lit logs, is they work for all ages, all skills, whether your child is reading it on their own or you are reading aloud to them. Hey guys, sorry, I'm just jumping into the video real quick. I'm sitting here editing and I realized something that I forgot to mention is that lit logs are just the jumping off point. This is where I start. It is the bare minimum of what we do for literature. But then I can take that and go and dive deeper into it. I talk about this a little bit here in a few minutes when I talk about the benefits of lit logs, but you can take your lit logs and then create all kinds of projects and things with your kids depending on what age they are. You could do fun themed snacks. You could do craft projects, activities outdoors, kind of like a unit study style idea, maybe like a 5 in a row or something like that. But using literature as a jumping off point to get your kids excited about books and what they're learning as they are reading. And so lit logs is the bare minimum that we do for literature study, but oftentimes we go down big rabbit trails and go farther and do bigger and better projects to go along with their illustrations and written narrations. So just wanted to add that in here real quick. All right, let's talk about benefits of using lit logs in your homeschool. And yeah, there are a lot. First of all, age range. This works with all ages in all stages. As I've said multiple times in this video, you can use this with preschoolers all the way up until high school. And it is so flexible. If you have a struggling reader, you can do books that are at their level. If you have a struggling writer, you can have them dictate narrations to you. I mean, you can really make literature logs work for your child, for your season of life. The flexibility is endless. Lit logs are also a great subject if you are trying to train your children to be independent in some of their schoolwork. It is something that they can pretty well do on their own without any help from you. And so for those later elementary school, moving into middle school years, lit logs can really benefit you by helping to train your children to start doing some of their schoolwork on their own. Another huge benefit is that lit logs can incorporate a lot of different subjects. So, for example, you're already covering literature and art and writing. You could also utilize this for history. You could have them read historical fiction books or books that are going along what you are studying in the timeline of history. You could have them read science biographies about scientists that you are studying in your science curriculum. You could incorporate typing. You could have them type out their written narration after they write it out. You could use their written narration as handwriting practice. They could use it as copy work and write out their narration in cursive. You could also turn this into speech, where you have your child get up at dinner time and read their lit log aloud to the family, or go to co-op or some homeschool group and share what they are reading about in their lit log and share it as a group and start a discussion or a speech practice. I mean, there are just so many ways that you can incorporate different subjects and different skills just in the simple act of creating a lit log. As I mentioned before, lit logs are super inexpensive. I mean, you really need minimal supplies to be able to tackle lit logs in your homeschool all year long. I mean, heck, you wouldn't even have to purchase the books that your child is reading. You could just borrow them from the library. And so then all you would need is paper and writing utensils, and that would be it. So lit logs are super inexpensive. Last, but probably one of my absolute favorite things about lit logs is that at the end of the year, you have a built-in keepsake for your child. You have beautiful illustrations about books that they have read, retold in their own words. Guys, when I go through and I save my children's work from year to year, the things that I have a really hard time letting go of are their lit logs. I honestly could almost keep every single reading journal entry that they have ever made because it is so special, it is so personal, and it's like this own little keepsake photo album of what they have learned throughout the year. Okay, so next up, I want to show you guys some actual examples from the different age levels of lit logs that my kids have done throughout the years. So that's going to require me to run downstairs and get out some of their old curriculum. All right, so welcome to my very loud, very poorly lit storage room. This is an unfinished space in our basement where I have a lot of shelving, not quite organized yet, that houses a bunch of our homeschool records, extra craft supplies, outgrown toys and clothing, things like that. These boxes that I've been showing here, these file storage bins, these are my long-term homeschool storage where I put all of our records and work that I want to keep for my kids throughout their homeschooling career. This is where I store those items, and I have devoted an entire video to creating these boxes and a portfolio video where I talk about what I keep and what I throw away. I'll be sure to link both of those down below if you want more details. I wanted to pull some of the records from my kids from years past. I wanted to share some of the lit logs that they have done from kindergarten all the way up through middle school into 8th grade, just to give you a good sample of how they can look for different age ranges. All right, so I just want to share some advice or tips for success if you are considering implementing lit logs into your homeschool. I have a list here so I don't forget to share anything with you guys. First of all, I definitely want to encourage you that narration and illustration skills are something that take time to build in your child. This is not something that they are going to master overnight. It's something that you have to work at, and they will learn to do better and better little by little. So, for example, when my kids are young, some ways I start building in some narration and illustration skills are, let's say, for instance, I'm sitting and reading Curious George to them. Every few pages, I will ask them a question. I'll say, hey, what's in this picture? Hey, look, where's the man with the yellow hat? Oh, what do you think George is going to do? I try to make sure that they're really engaged in the story and are developing that skill to be able to talk about the story back to me. Something else I'll do is at the end of the story, if they've really enjoyed it, I will hand them the book, even if they don't know how to read yet, and I'll say, hey, tell the story back to mommy. And I'll let them flip through the pages and retell the story in their own words. This is really just some basic narration skills that even a preschooler can start practicing. When my kids were really young, I used to get them excited and interested in literature by just simply printing out some coloring pages from their favorite picture books. And this would be their version of doing their own illustration from the book. Sometimes we would do themed snacks or crafts or things like that to go along with the books we were reading. Again, just getting them excited and engaged in literature. As often as you can, let your child choose the book that they are reading. Now, I'm not saying to go to the library and just let them have free reign to read whatever they want. I am actually encouraging you to be more like my junior high school teacher and to put several books out for them to select from. Maybe you have a special bookshelf, a special literature shelf for them, and they can go choose any of the books on that shelf that you have pre-approved that are of the right age level and the content that you are looking for. But let them choose the book that they are reading. They will be so much more engaged and so much more invested in the assignment if they feel like they have a choice. Obviously, my story is proof of that. If you don't know what type of books to have your child read, utilize book lists. There are so many out there. Sarah Mackenzie has wonderful book suggestions on her website at the Read Aloud Revival. 5 in a Row is a unit study. They have amazing book lists. Sunlight is a homeschool company that is a literature-based homeschool curriculum. A lot of their reading lists are really great. You can look at a lot of different homeschool resources, but find a good book list from a resource that you trust and use that as a guide if you are needing suggestions on what literature your children should be reading. I would also really encourage you to utilize lit logs during your daily quiet time. This has been so helpful in our house. My kids do their lit logs at quiet time every day. While my toddler is napping, while my preschooler is sometimes playing quietly in his room, my older kids all take whatever literature book they are reading, go to their corners, read, and work on their lit logs. And this honestly keeps everybody quiet for a good hour. Reading, writing, illustrating. They have nice, quiet, focused time to do this, and it also gives mom a good hour or so of quiet time in the afternoon. I would also encourage you to utilize meal times to talk about literature. So when you are sitting around the dinner table eating tacos, ask one of your kids, hey, what did you do in literature today? Not to put them on the spot or to test them, but to try to engage in a conversation with them about what they're reading, to help them to be excited about the literature that they are studying. This is really fun, especially like for my younger kids. They'll name a book that they're reading that my older kids read several years ago, and this will be like, oh, have you gotten to this part? This one's so cool. It just creates this wonderful discussion that happens organically. Now, this last one is really important. Try your hardest not to grade your children's literature log. If you are not required to keep track of grades in your state, I would really encourage you not to grade their work. This is an area of our homeschool where I am trying to encourage my kids to be excited and love what they are reading and wanting to tell me what they're learning about. And so if I get nitpicky about their handwriting, their grammar, their spelling, they are not going to enjoy giving me a narration. And so they know that the bare minimum is it needs to be neat, it needs to be legible, I need to be able to easily read it, and you know, they need to try their best. They need to do their best work. But outside of that, I don't get on their case if they have terrible grammar or bad spelling. This is really about reading good literature, and about talking about good literature. All right, guys, well, if you have made it this far, you are my people. Thank you for sticking around. I know this was a long one, but I hope it was helpful. I hope it was encouraging. If you have any specific questions about lit logs or want more ideas or information, please just leave me a comment down below. I would love to talk more about it down in the comments.